Today on the Lead Well podcast, I'm joined by Barbara Brennan, a seasoned mental health advocate, trainer, speaker and consultant who has spent close to 2 decades leading the charge on stigma reduction and inclusion across Ireland. Barbara has led Ireland's national programme to reduce mental health related stigma, worked with major organisations such as Pust, and lectured in leading universities including Trinity and DCU. Barbara is also the founder of Mental Health Matters and Mentis One, a platform focused on helping companies move beyond one-off wellbeing initiatives and embed meaningful, lasting cultural change. In today's conversation, we look at the current state of workplace mental health and the gap that Barbara saw, which inspired both Mental Health Matters and Mentis One. We also dive into Barbara's lived experience with mental health. Having been a suicide survivor herself, she shares some of the behaviours and actions that she calls her non-negotiables. As always, I hope you enjoy this episode and please do hit the subscribe button. Thank you. Barbara Brennan, you're very welcome to the Lead Well podcast.
I'm delighted to be here. Thanks for asking me in.
I think the last time that I would have actually seen you, you were up on stage, you were receiving an award for outstanding contribution to wellbeing. This was back in 2024. Tell me a little bit about what that experience was like and obviously the impact of achieving or receiving that award.
Well, firstly, it was bizarre because I had pneumonia, so I didn't think I was going to make it. I had the experience of writing a speech for my partner to deliver and then had miraculous recovery that the laryngitis I'd had for a week disappeared that morning. So adrenaline was very helpful. It was a huge surprise. I think I have held IBEC and the Keep Well mark very highly and I've seen the work of a lot of people through it, and particularly this award as well. I've seen the previous winners. So to be alongside people like Brezzy and Brent Pope and Caroline McGuigan and Panty Bliss, like that's a phenomenal lineup. So when they told me that I had won it, I didn't really believe it. And then I started questioning why, and I started looking for, well, what did I do and what is it that I've done that is outstanding? And I think a lot of it was very much around actually it's just your consistency and the fact that you're continuing to push for countrywide change, that it's a social movement and that it doesn't matter who you're working with or where you are, you're always in the same place and you're always so open to supporting people and you're looking at linking people in, and it's never about financial gain. It's always about the outcome for the end user. So I think, it was really interesting, but I think it has very definitely given me a lot more confidence in my knowledge base, I suppose, and believing in myself more, because obviously leaving Sea Change was a huge thing for me, and starting my own business and then very early on winning that award was like, this is the right direction, and I need to focus on what's good about this and really tailor that more.
Yeah, and I was going to say that's a really, because obviously you would have started your own business in September 2023. Yeah. So obviously then receiving this award quite soon after that was a really nice boost, I'd imagine, as an entrepreneur out on your own for the first time.
Yeah, and particularly as well, because I never understood a lot of awards that you have to self-nominate. So this one, I didn't even know I had been nominated for. So that was even nicer, to get this call to say, well, actually, you've won this award. And, we think this is really timely and we'd love to celebrate you and your work. So that's been huge. And it's a consistent reminder because the award itself is actually a light, and I found a really nice table for it to go on. I have looked for a table for a year. I have now found it. I've just moved house and it has pride of place in my sitting room and we use it as a lamp every day. So it is my reminder that my work matters and that my life matters. And it's not that we should ever have that thing that we need external validation, but I think it is helpful sometimes on the days where, like you, as an entrepreneur, you have those questions of, am I wild in the mind that I'm doing this? And it's like, actually, you're dead right. You need to be a little bit wild to do something different.
And I was going to ask you that because obviously that receiving that award is an incredible experience, right? But you're doing this a long time. You're trying to reduce stigma across Ireland. You're essentially trying to push this message out for 15, 20 years at this stage.
Yeah.
So receiving an award like that can be great, but tell me, how have you managed to remain, I suppose, committed to that cause for such a long period of time?
Well, for me, that's a no-brainer. I mean, I'm a suicide survivor, and my whole why around everything I do is to help one person not feel that way. And the truth of it has become that it's not one person anymore. I got really greedy about that. And it was like, actually, it's not the one person, it's the person who leads that group. And then I started realizing, actually, it's not the person who leads the group, it's the person who supports the people to lead the groups. And then it's the people who support them to roll out more groups. So it's now going much higher in order to have a much wider reach. And that for me is the piece about building community, that it's now building support network. It's getting everybody involved in the conversation, and it's helping people understand that mental health is everybody's conversation, that it's possible for any human being to become mentally unwell. But also the flip is true, that it is possible for anybody who is unwell to become well. And that's, for me, the biggest message that everybody needs to hear. And I think particularly when we look at workplace, there's a new element that's come into that. And there's a lot of other pieces that we're starting to become aware of. And it's about helping the individual and the organisation to work out the how and do it in a safe way and create this culture that it's okay to be ourselves while also doing our jobs. Because I think it's this idea of well-being or money or mental health or working really hard. And that's a really big myth that we need to bust.
Yeah, because I was going to actually say to you, when we think of, biopsychosocial factors, when we think of the workplace, I wonder how much emphasis we actually put on that social element. Because you've mentioned it there, naturally within a workplace, the goal is productivity. We want everybody performing at their best. And I often find that the approach to that is actually quite myopic. We're not thinking about longevity. We're thinking about this quarter, next quarter.
Yeah.
So I'm curious just to get your insight into what are you seeing within workplaces from that social perspective that maybe we've been getting wrong for a long time and now we're starting to address those?
Well, I think if you look at any really high performing team, one of the things they do really well is that they bond quickly, but they also challenge each other. So there's a safety in the challenge. And I think that is one of the biggest keys for an organisation to get that right. That it's a matter of, if we're doing something that isn't working, or that can be done more efficiently, or we need to completely pivot, it needs to be safe for you as an employee to come and challenge other members of your team, or challenge up from a point of view of senior leadership need to hear this. And I think that is a huge shift. And for organisations that do that really well, they understand. And I mentioned before we came on here, I'm doing growth hacking at the moment, and it's a phenomenal and exciting thing to learn about. But it is this piece of, what is it that we do well? What is it that we don't do well? And how can we shift from one to the other? And what are the pieces that we're missing in between? And what's the data around that? To bring it back to a social perspective, also, we have to remember that as humans, we are social creatures. And there is an element of actually, we all hear about fight or flight or freeze. That comes down to, do I feel safe with this community, with this person? And if I'm isolating myself, I'm not having that opportunity, which also in the background, my brain is probably telling me that it's more likely that I'm going to die because I don't have somebody to watch over me. And when we think about it in that perspective, like, for example, if I go back thousands of years, if we were in a community, I would be safe to sleep because somebody else would take watch. Or while I'm getting water, you're getting food, or whatever the practical things are. If I am completely on my own, if I sleep, it's more likely that I'm going to get eaten by a bear or whatever. So maybe I'm not going to sleep anymore. So it's that safety mechanism. And bringing that into the workplace then, it's understanding that we have all of these things going on, and how do we not just hack it, but how do we actually bring that social connection? And what I see work really well is when organisations come together and they have brainstorming sessions and everybody is included that needs to be. It means that you have junior people that have amazing ideas, and it gets brought out and it gets acted on, and everybody feels good about that. Or when a senior leader comes in and says, well, actually, here's an idea, but I'm giving you the run on this, or you're going to work with me, or you're going to work with whoever on this. We're doing this together. That's phenomenal. Or when somebody does come up and say, this is not working right, or we need to change it, or whatever, and others agree. It's that social glue. And I think that's a really big part of when it's done well. So it's not about achieving perfection. It's not about only doing the right things, or it's not a specific format. It's about when people feel seen and heard, and when they feel like they belong, and when they feel safe to make a challenge. Those are the differences. What I'm also seeing is there is a huge amount now of social interaction groups. So you've got different networks within an organisation, and they bond together, which is amazing. And then you see a lot of things on social media around, we're doing the marathon together, or we've got a baking group, or whatever it is. However, quite often they stay within that group. So it's like these groups become siloed.
Yeah.
So there's still an element here where we're looking at the wider social connection. And then from a workplace perspective, is it now that we've kind of said, well, work is here and you're part of that, but we've now taken you out of that a little bit to go into this little silo, which is connected to work, but it's still not work. So I still think there's a bit of work we need to do around that gap.
I couldn't agree with you more, actually. And I love your analogy around sleeping soundly at night, essentially. Like natural selection kind of got us ready for a world that when we think of today, it's completely different. And if we think about anxiety or stress that we experience in the workplace, and this idea that once I clock out, that stays in work.
If only. If only.
So we can all of a sudden see how people are struggling. And then it's a vicious cycle, because if my sleep is poor, my energy is poor, my mental clarity is poor, I generally make bad decisions, I'm more stressed, I'm more anxious, I'm more overwhelmed as a result. But that last point you actually brought up, it's funny. I remember back probably about maybe 6 months ago, one of the companies we work with, one of the individuals came up to me and he actually said to me, you guys are doing a hell of a lot, and so is the company. But do you ever consider that a lot of what you're doing, and again, people will understand when I say this, a lot of what you're doing is geared towards the female population. So we're creating a lot of these resource and support groups for the female population, which he also said I completely agree with. But he said, we're not doing as much for the males within the organization. And it's just interesting because just like you've said, and I know you're a massive proponent of inclusion, I never saw it from that perspective where, okay, yes, we need to put a focus on these elements, but it was nearly like we were blind to the fact that we actually also still need to be considerate of, we're not creating those silos. We want people cross-collaborating, engaging with one another. So I think that
there's a huge thing, like somebody I know very well was going for a job interview and they said, there's a really big list and they do amazing diversity and inclusion in their organisation. They have all these different things. And they came to me with the form they had to fill in, and they were like, I'm a heterosexual white female. I am blonde, I'm blue-eyed, I am this age, I don't have a disability, I don't have this and this. I can't tick about 20 of those boxes. And I'm wondering, is that going to go against me because I'm not fulfilling a particular fit for their organisation because of their drive for the DE&I? And she's like, it's not that I don't want other people to be hired. And I think there should be equality, but it's definitely making me feel less than. And I've also heard that from a male perspective around equality not actually being equal. So it's a matter of, it's not about saying, well, this is a female only thing or this is a male only thing. It's about actually what does everybody need in order to have a similar experience. So now we're talking about equity, and that's a very different thing. And I think that's where we start saying, like I've heard of, say, for example, women in business networks. And it's, you walk in and there's men there and you can kind of see some people going, well, why are they there? It's supposed to be a women's network. But the point is that if you're human, if there is something that we can challenge each other with or we can support each other with, does it really matter some of those denominators? And I think that's where some of us have become so focused on fighting a particular cause or fixing a particular problem that we've forgotten about some of that and the real meaning behind inclusion, and then going back to that safety mechanism that we all have. That's why the belonging piece hurts so much when we feel excluded. Not because this person won't talk to me or I didn't get into that group, because literally there is a part of us saying, I might die. And I think that we've forgotten that we have this animal instinct to keep us alive. And that's why we feel our feelings so strongly in these instances. But we've forgotten that that's why. And that makes it harder. And
I'm actually just thinking about the current context, globally, we see workforce reductions and redundancies are nearly the norm in the news.
Yep.
I did a session on Friday and I was just doing some research around this. And in the tech sector, between January and May of this year, globally, 75,000 people from over 230 organizations have actually been made redundant, which...
It's very unsafe.
And then you think about maybe the pushback around DE&I initiatives as well.
Yeah.
And we're trying to create these environments where people can do their best work. Yeah. We're starting to see that these environments aren't necessarily psychologically safe, are they?
No, they're not. No, they're not. And the other thing as well is we have to remember we have only recently come out of a pandemic, you know, and I think we've moved past it so quickly that a lot of us have not taken the learnings from it, and particularly in this workplace perspective. And it's one of those things that when we're thinking about, for example, people working their best, we see flexi time coming in really well. We see people who, you know, maybe a parent, it means that actually I can do my parenting and live my life, but I can also work. But now we're starting to see maybe I'm just going to log in and I'm going to do work from 8 to 10 o'clock. So instead of actually resting and relaxing and switching off when I'm getting ready to go to sleep, I'm gearing up and I'm more productive at a time so there's a lot of things around flexibility and around all of these things that have been put in place to support. But going back to that human animal piece, what is it? What damage is it doing? Or are we tracking it? Are we actually looking at it at all? And then there's the pieces around the right to disconnect and all these different things. So where do they fit? So it's, you know, mental health is messy. So none of this is tidy either. But I think there's a lot of things that we can be doing that can help in the meantime. And I think that piece around psychological safety is to help people feel safer to ask questions or to say, this works better for me. And I know me, I'm the only person who spends 365 days a year, every single year with me. So I know that this suits me. Or I know that you have this process and this policy. And out of that, 75% of it is excellent. But this 25% is a really tough call for me.
Yeah, and it's interesting just as you're chatting there, because on previous conversations that we've had, we talked about behaviours and daily behaviours and how that's the key to obviously managing our mental health and well-being. And when I consider well-being, and obviously we're in that space as well, the way I look at it is, if I'm working within an organisation, is my organisation helping me structure my day so that I can bring in certain behaviours that are going to produce good mental health outcomes? And are they able to stamp out the areas that we know are not going to be conducive to good mental health? So like what you're saying there, logging back on at a time where I should be winding down is certainly not conducive to good mental health. And I think for me, when I see companies do it well, it's they're very mindful of, okay, there's a set of behaviours that are going to produce good mental health outcomes. There's a set of behaviours that we want to discourage in our workplace population because it's actually going to reduce mental health. I'm just interested to get your take on that, because you're obviously on the front line working with organisations in this space. Is that what you're seeing practically?
Yeah, and I think there's also a piece, just to throw a spanner in the works, there's also a piece where there is the acknowledgement and allowance of, you know what, you're a grown-up and you're allowed to make decisions for yourself. So, for example, if we are saying, look, we would prefer that you're not logging on between 8 and 10 o'clock at night to get this work done, but you're coming back and saying, well, actually, since I have shifted to that and I'm now able to pick up my kids, or I'm able to, you know, I don't have kids, but I'm able to now go to the gym or do this or do that. And actually my life has improved and I'm finding that I'm more productive at this particular time. And actually there's loads of different benefits to this. Well, then that's something that we need to rely on the information from that person that they actually do know themselves. So it's not that we should be saying, well, it's one size fits all and actually this doesn't work for anybody. There is an element of flexibility that works. I think it's the piece around education. So when we say to people, if it is a thing that you do need to be logging on, the other questions you need to be asking yourself are you getting the right amount of sleep? So is it that by logging on that you can sleep a little bit more in the morning, or you have a nap in the afternoon, or whatever the thing is? But if you're doing this thing and the productivity is going up and all the other areas of your life are doing well, but your sleep is still negatively impacted, what's the thing? Where's the gap there that we really need to focus on. So it's not that the organisation should be responsible for a person's sleep, but it's about educating somebody in what their choices are and the impact of those things. So it's about understanding, is tomorrow me going to thank me for whatever action I'm taking now, whether it's going to bed early or going to bed late or having a coffee at 9 o'clock at night or working until 10 o'clock and then being on a screen. So it's about understanding the impact of my choices and then how that also impacts my workload and what the messaging of my organisation is around this. So for example, if you have an organisation that still isn't using the schedule send and you get an email at 10:30 at night, even if the person the next morning says to you, oh, sorry, I work really well at that time, that's absolutely fine. But if you know that I don't work at that time, it's not appropriate for you to be sending me something well out of working hours just because it suits you.
Yeah.
So there's a couple of things there where we are becoming a lot more aware of other people's working environments, working habits, and having a lot more flexibility and understanding about that. But there's still that piece of irritation that might flare in, well, why are you sending me that? It's not appropriate. And then my question to that person is, well, what are you doing checking your emails at that time of night that you knew it came in anyway?
Because they're on my phone.
So this is the thing, that it's about understanding how we put barriers in place and what we choose to engage in. Because also, if something came in and you got a notification, can you not block notifications during a certain time? So then it's about having an understanding around your digital hygiene. So for anybody who hasn't heard of Unplug, Chris Flack is a phenomenal mind around all of this and has created a fabulous product around helping people disconnect in an appropriate way. So there's a couple of pieces there that I would highly recommend for individuals and organisations looking at appropriate measures on how to put some of this stuff in play.
Yeah, and it's again, there's this tension really that sits between productivity and well-being. And I like how you've described it. You know, some people, if they have young kids, they may find that between 8 and 10 in the evening is a good time to get some work done, but it's probably keeping that line of communication open with those individuals to ensure that that tension that sits between productivity and well-being is not leaning too far across to the productivity side at the expense of the well-being.
That's it.
I was looking, in preparation for this, I was looking at just a couple of bits of research that have been done recently, and in terms of mental health solutions within workplaces, I was reading essentially that 20% of organizations actually have something in place to help with mental health of employees. You're looking at roughly 10% of organizations have mental health champions. And this was relatively recent across Ireland. I'm just, when you hear those figures, I suppose, what does that say to you when you hear those figures?
Well, we're moving in the right direction. There's a couple of things that come up for me. First of all, it's about understanding why the organisation is doing it in the first place. So from a point of view of providing those supports, that's amazing, because we understand actually there are things that do come into work, and also there are work-related things that maybe we need to provide that support for. Absolutely fabulous. And there is an employment piece. From a law perspective, legally, they are obliged to provide supports that may minimise the impact of these negative things, which is great. When we start thinking about mental health champions and this role, there is a huge amount of questions that I have around this from a point of view of understanding what's the purpose of it, and more importantly, what's the safeguarding around it, and what's the long-term plan. Because what I'm seeing a lot in the last couple of years is that organisations do a 2-day programme, for example, and they then, you get your lanyard and your face goes on a poster with your email address, and maybe in 3 months' time, a group comes together and you have a chat about what's working, what's not working. And then it kind of goes away and nobody checks in, or there's no process, or there's no monitoring or evaluation. And most importantly, there's no safeguarding. So also from a point of view of vetting, for example, it's not that I'm saying everybody should be guarded vetted or that kind of thing, but just because I display an intense want to do something doesn't necessarily mean I'm the right person for it. So for example, I might be really interested in marketing and I might have some great ideas. That doesn't mean that you should be hiring me to your marketing team, because maybe I don't actually have the background. Or maybe I'm prone to saying particular things that if they happened to come into the marketing program, maybe not the right fit for the company. So there's a couple of pieces around making sure that the fit is correct, that the timing is correct, because also there's the piece of not now doesn't mean not ever. So maybe, for example, if I've just experienced, so I've just told you I've moved house. So let's say it was moving house, having a baby, having a bereavement, having a breakup, having an illness, whatever. You have stuff going on. That isn't the right time to be trying to do an additional thing to support other people. So it could be that there is a holding space, that it's a matter of actually, you're welcome to do the training, but maybe while you have these things going on, what additional support can we give you? And then how can you feed that back into us when you are ready? Do you know, so there's a couple of mechanisms there that I think aren't in place. What the movement towards these kind of things is telling me is that organisations are understanding their obligation more, that they see not just the need for it, but they see it as the right thing to do. And they genuinely want to create positive change around this. They genuinely want to provide solutions for their employees, because there's so many organisations that they help you with career development, they help you with all these things to move on and to have a better life while you're with them. That's phenomenal. So that is the biggest thing that I'm seeing. The counter to that is that no matter how hard an organisation is working to do these things, a lot of the time they're shouting in the dark, because there is no roadmap, there is no best guide, best practice. These are the steps you take, and here's how you measure it, and here's where you go, and here's your certification, and all of that. That doesn't exist, and it doesn't exist across the world. So Ireland is not alone in that, and I think that is a massive challenge for organisations, looking at how do we do the right thing at the right time in the right way, and how do we sustain it? So that's the piece I think that's coming next. I also do think that there's a legal fear I have, I suppose, around the mental health champions or advocates or whatever we want to call them, that when an organisation takes on this role and they don't implement it properly, the potential harm both to that employee and the employee that they may be providing support for, the potential for harm there is huge. So for me, I'm looking down the line to the legal implications of what that might mean, and how an organisation can mitigate or actually just avoid it by putting things in place in the first place.
Because you're right, when I think of maybe the people who put their hand up to do mental health first aid training, you know, again, generally they have a natural interest in that space, they want to help people, etc. But in some cases, it's like, where do we draw that line for that person? Because they're not a psychologist. They're there to maybe make the organisation aware that an individual could be potentially struggling.
And to signpost, and that's appropriate. And I think actually just on that point, there was research done in the UK, and it was almost 50% of people who take this role on have personal experience, so lived experience of a mental health difficulty. So what that means is that we have higher empathy, we have higher drive, we have higher purpose for this, we have a much deeper understanding. However, on the flip side, it also means that we're more likely to be more vulnerable. So that if I've had that experience myself and I haven't done particular training around boundary setting, or, you know, like there's a reason why I decided not to be a psychologist, for example, because I know that if I was to sit and listen one-to-one to people's deepest, darkest truths, I don't know that I could turn that off at night and not continue to think about that person. So at one point in my life, I wanted to go into that area. And then as I started going down that route, I realised actually, no matter how well my intentions are, I don't think I can protect myself from myself. And that's the bit that we need to get to. So it's that piece about understanding, you know, having somebody who has an experience, and obviously I have lived experience and it's why I do what I do. But that doesn't mean that everybody that has an experience is the right person for a role like that, or that everybody wants to either. So it's about making sure that those people who have had that experience, or who are a carer or a friend of somebody, so they've had a kind of one-step experience from a point of view of not experiencing it themselves to that degree, how can we appropriately train those people to be able to have the correct boundaries in place so that it's appropriate for them and for the person they're listening to, that also they have correct guidance from their organisation about expectations around, you know, what is included and what isn't. You know, so it's all of that, and it's navigating that. And the thing is that, you know, I want to be very clear. I'm a mental health first aid instructor. I think it is a phenomenal programme. I've championed it for 10 years. I think everybody in the world should do this programme. It doesn't mean that everybody who does the 2-day programme should be an advocate for a workplace. It's a very different thing. So I just think that there is a bit more work that we need to do internationally around understanding the impact of it, and also to say to people, well, actually, have you considered how many hours you're going to have to do this volunteer role? Or even if it is paid, how is that going to impact your workload? Do you know, or are you talking to your manager about the fact that you're having to have these conversations? And what happens if you get really upset because somebody's told you something and you need to take the rest of the day off? Has your organisation thought about that? Or what if somebody's ringing you at 9 o'clock on a Saturday night because they know that you're the workplace mental health first aider? Have you thought about that, or has your workplace thought about that? So it's about the practical elements of these programs, understanding firstly how they work and why they should do a certain thing, but also understanding what they don't do and what they shouldn't do. So it's the same way from a work perspective. We go to work to get paid. You know, pretty much that's my understanding. There's a lot of people who tie purpose to their work, but that isn't necessarily the first driver. Yeah. So it's understanding that if I'm doing this in the context of my workplace, I have to also apply that hat from a point of view of I am doing this for a separate reason than my personal goal. If I want to do mental health first aid and apply that in my own personal life, that is absolutely my choice and I can do that. But if I'm doing it from a workplace context, I need to apply a workplace context to it.
Oh, it makes a lot of sense. And I've done the course myself, and it is a fantastic course. We've had people in our team do it. And what's interesting is, even just as you described it there, one or two of them wanted to do it, not necessarily to be the advocate or the mental health first aider within the team. It was more just to understand it. And in some cases, it was to understand it from a personal perspective as well, and gain more knowledge around what is mental health. And I've seen the benefit that it's had on them as well. It's a phenomenal
program.
Yeah. So let me ask you, Barbara, I'm going to bring you back a little bit, because we also like to bring on entrepreneurs on this podcast and talk a little bit about the entrepreneurial journey. You obviously worked within Sea Change for a number of years. You then went out and you set up your own company. You've got Mental Health Matters, and we've got obviously Mentis One, which we're going to talk a little bit about as well. But maybe describe to me what that experience was like, setting up your own company. Because obviously, and I'm sure anyone listening to this can already tell, for me, passion and purpose I would use to describe you. But you obviously saw a gap in the, let's say, in the market, right? You saw, okay, this could be done better, and I want to maybe step in and fill that gap. So talk to me a little bit about that journey.
So there was two pieces. I think if I mention the purpose bit first. So I have been considering some of this work for over a decade. So I have been watching this consistently through my work with Sea Change, through my work before Sea Change, through my work with lots of different organisations from a consultancy perspective, all before I considered leaving my job and starting out on my own. And honestly, when I left my job, I wasn't planning on starting out on my own. I was actually planning taking the rest of the year off. And what happened was so many clients came to me and kind of went, oh my God, you're available. Can you come and do something, please? And it coincided with World Suicide Prevention Day and World Mental Health Day. So I kind of went, right, okay, I'm not sure what I'm going to do. I'm going to do this, suck it and see. I'm going to do this till Christmas and see what falls out. See what it is that people are really looking for. See what it is that people value my knowledge and opinion on, and how I can add value. So I started with that, and it was very kind of hit and miss and reactive and all of that. So in the new year, I then started looking at, okay, so what is the thing that people are asking me the most? And very much going back to that piece about what have I been witnessing for the last 10 years? Because really working with organisations over the last decade, I've seen huge shifts around understanding the topic. So from a point of view of the door being open on mental health, absolutely it is. The thing is, though, we still are afraid of talking about mental illness. We are still afraid of getting involved in other people's issues. We are still afraid of supporting people. We are still afraid of giving the wrong advice or information. And all of those are valid things. And the thing is that what I have witnessed, regardless of all these things, is that there is no guide map. There is no route. And personally, I feel that it should be coming from government, that this is a national issue. I think this is a national crisis. And when the pandemic happened very early on, I flagged to quite a number of people that would know me well that the next pandemic is going to be a mental health pandemic, because the impact of isolation, the impact of the pressure of being on our own, of reworking out who we are, all of the additional things, and then being catapulted back into life at 10 times the speed. Because I don't know about you, but everybody that I have met that, you know, we were doing banana bread and yoga and doing all of this amazing stuff. And we were changing our lives. And we promised, I'm going to keep this up. This is going to be amazing. And now you talk to people and it's like, I'll schedule you in for September 2026 because I don't have 2 seconds between now and then because I'm doing 75 things for the kids and then I've this for work and then I've that. And so it is that piece about understanding that life is happening anyway, that a lot of the problems that are here now from a mental health perspective are actually not new. And that unless we look at a process that is applicable across the board, that everybody can use, or a framework, if you like, that gives the best practice, that gives the baseline standards that everybody should adhere to. And then you're going to have your bronze, silver, gold, that you have organisations that have more resources. So naturally, they're going to be leaders in that space. But it's about making sure we don't leave anybody behind. So, for example, small and medium enterprises, why should they be left out because they don't have a HR person or the budget? Or like me, that you're an entrepreneur and you're going, well, I'm a solo show, so I can't take a week to go on this particular training course, which would be phenomenal to do, but who's going to mind the business or who's going to look after the clients while that happens? So for me, it was looking at how do we provide this baseline standard? Where does that exist already? Who's doing it well across the world and what's still missing? And then from a perspective of, okay, how do we actually apply that? So just because we know that these things are potentially the right thing to do or the best practice way of doing it, does it actually work? And if we did do it, what would that look like? So that's kind of where I started looking at filling some of those gaps and saying to an organisation, right, okay, you are going in a particular direction and you want advice on how to become more efficient. So you'll go down a particular route, or, you know, if you're developing tech, you're going to go to a tech company and you're going to make sure you have the right engineers and all of that. The same should be said in this area when we're looking at well-being, when we're looking at mental health. We should be looking at what are the key elements that we're looking to change, but also how are we monitoring and evaluating? Because a lot of what I'm seeing is that a lot of things are being done, they're ad hoc, they're not being connected together, they're not being reviewed, they're not being evaluated, and we're not taking the lessons learned. Because looking at something and saying, well, it didn't work, that's not saying it's a failure. Because the thing is that actually, and all of the historical documentation around this is if I don't fail enough times, I'm never going to succeed. So it's something around the language around the word failure. It's a matter of this is we're trying. It's not failed. It's a matter of actually that particular piece didn't work the way we wanted it to, but what do we learn from that? So now it's become that it actually did work because it taught us this thing.
Constant iterations.
It is. So I think that's a big piece that we need to be looking at.
Yeah, and it's, you know, I think that's quite a large undertaking for one person. So talk to me a little bit about how are you managing your day-to-day? We often like to dig into how the individual entrepreneur manages their performance and well-being.
So I suppose it starts with a very ironclad version of my well-being, and that comes from having been to the depths of despair from a point of view of not being able to function and spending years rebuilding my life, that I have an ironclad version that it's like these things are non-negotiable, you know, and there's a lot of times where we might go to the gym or we might drink loads of water or we might do the things that we know are good for us. And then when things get busy or when things become difficult, we start slipping and we start losing those things. And that's okay. But it's also about the accountability around that. So it's about if I know, for example, let's say we'll go back to sleep. Let's say I haven't had a great day and I decide that I'm going to sit and watch a movie. And then I decide, actually, do you know what? I'm still kind of in this headspace. I'm going to watch something else. And it's now 2:00 in the morning. And because I was sitting there at 12 o'clock and I'm going, well, I'm never normally up this late. I'm starving. So now I'm going to eat something, which is going to do something different for my body rather than switch it off. I'm now making choices. But the next morning when I get up and I'm grumpy and I'm tired and I'm not functioning the way I normally would, I'm going to blame it on lots of things, but I'm not going to blame myself for doing what I did. That's the accountability piece. So it's about saying, right, if you do this, is tomorrow Barbara going to thank you? Most likely not. Sometimes I'll say, well, absolutely no, she's not, but I'm doing it anyway. But tomorrow I'm going to fix it. So it's not about being perfect all the time. It's about owning our choices and then taking responsibility for it. So like that, the next day saying, okay, yesterday wasn't ideal. What can I do? So I've had that moment, I've put it down. Or like that, there are some days where somebody just needs a duvet day. And it's about not giving out to yourself for saying, I should be doing the dishes, I should be cutting the grass. I mean, I've just bought a house that has an acre of a garden. That thing takes nearly 4 hours to cut the grass. Do you know, like, and looking at all the things that we're not doing and beating ourselves with this stick. It's all the Catholic guilt and all that extra stuff that we don't need. But it's about stopping it after a period of time. So it's not wallowing in it. So that, for me, has been a process that it's a matter of, I try and approach my life with compassion, that on days where I'm not feeling it or on days where I'm mentally tired, I know that that is not the day to be reading research or developing content or putting my face on a video, for example. You know, so I know myself now better. And there are also days where I, like every entrepreneur, I question, am I completely wild? You know, should I just go and get a job in Tesco's? Why am I doing this? And as soon as that comes up, I always revisit my why, which is that I want to make the system better. Yeah. I want for every single human being to have a space where they are seen and heard. And if they have a moment of difficulty, that somebody sees them or that they feel I can ask, that it's safe for me to ask and that I can get the help, regardless of whether that is in my community, in my family, in my work, doesn't matter. So that's why a lot of my campaign work is, I'm greedy. It's everybody. I don't have a small niche. It's a matter of actually, this is everybody's conversation. But bringing it back to my workplace piece, I have this dedicated piece around how much time we spend in our workplace and the impact that it has on the rest of our lives. So from an entrepreneur perspective, I have a dedicated room that I go to for my work. I make sure that I leave my desk on regular intervals. If I get a phone call, I walk outside. Part of the fact now that I have no reception in the room helps. I have a standing desk that I use. So there's things that I have built in that automatically happen. So I don't think about it anymore. It's like if I say to you, I want you to take a toothbrush and put toothpaste on it and hold it in your hand. You don't have to think about what happens next. Or if you're a driver, when you get in the car, you don't have to think about what happens next. So it's about building those procedures, if you like. And then from a point of view of my workload, I break it into chunks. So I might have a day where I will have loads of like calls. So today, for example, I'm out and I have loads of meetings back to back. It's amazing. I'll get loads of energy from this. Tomorrow, I will probably be tired because I've peopled a lot. I've been doing a lot of driving. So I will have what I call an admin day. And I might do formatting. So I will do something that is a low brain intensity job, but something that needs to get done, but isn't my high priority. So if that makes sense. So I make sure that I switch up what I'm doing. I also hired...
By the way, I was just going to say, I think I just want to emphasize what you've just said in the last couple of minutes for anybody listening in.
Yeah.
It's probably one of the best yet can be the hardest bits of advice for an entrepreneur to hear is, and for anyone to hear really, this idea of cycling between days where they're high intense, a lot of people interaction, and then being able to cycle between a day which isn't necessarily doing nothing, but you can sustain and I would say that I often fall into that trap of not being aware enough of the impact of 4 to 5, let's say, high intense days in a row. Yeah. And how that then completely distorts your sense of reality as well.
It does.
Because all of a sudden then the inner critic is very loud.
You haven't done this. Wait until I tell you the whole list of things that you've missed this week. And by the way, I've thought of some extra stuff that wasn't on your list, but I'm going to add them as well. So yeah, we're really good at that. So I think from that perspective, it's really important that we have a process to work through to look at, well, how am I actually doing? So do I spend time? So for example, once a month, I will look at my calendar and I color code. So for example, if I have meetings in person, they're blue. If I have activities that are paid for to do a client work, they're green. If I have just random tasks to do, they're yellow. So I know, looking at my calendar, how much time is spent specifically on different things, and travel is red. So I don't have an option around that. So looking at my month, I can very quickly see I've spent way too much time in this particular area and I need to spend more time in this. Or actually I'm spending more and more time on my own because I'm now working alone and I'm so focused on what I'm doing. I actually need to connect in with other humans. And social network, going back to what we talked about earlier, is so important. So like that, my partner is phenomenal at knocking on the door and arriving in with a cup of tea, or coming and saying to me, I know you're choosing to work late and that's absolutely fine, but what time are you cutting off at? Because there are times like that I will get into flow and all of a sudden it's 5 hours later and I won't have moved, I won't have changed my desk and like that, I have chronic pain issues, so I'll be crippled the next day.
Yeah.
But it's about managing my expectation around that and managing the disappointment, because that's the other piece as an entrepreneur, that sometimes when you have great ideas and you meet great people and things start happening, and then there's the practical stuff that needs to happen on the side of it, and then there's the growth stuff that needs to happen over here. You can't do all of it. So like that, last year I hired a virtual assistant and she has a team. So I farm out a certain amount of tasks, which is phenomenal. And it is one of the things that very early on I looked at. How is this going to impact my life and my money? So from a perspective early on, I kind of went, it's more important, I need to pay her before I pay myself. Now, I do think that's a mistake, and I will say to everybody, pay yourself first. But in doing that, I was very quickly able to increase my revenue so that I could do both. But it just means that I have somebody to sound off to. We have regular check-ins. I don't feel on my own. I also am part of a load of different networks from an entrepreneur perspective. And I have other human beings that are doing things totally different than me, but they are entrepreneurs. So they understand some of these things. So we can have a really candid conversation around either cheering each other on when things are going really well, or saying, that was really crappy, I'm sorry that happened for you, or what do you need? And just listening. And that piece is really important. So for me, it's about recognizing your path, I suppose, from a point of view of your energy, and putting it in buckets and knowing when you need to refill it. Having accountability, putting it in for yourself, or getting an accountability buddy if you know you're not good at that stuff, and then giving stuff to somebody else, because you can't and shouldn't do everything. And then the last piece, which is probably the first one actually, is your network.
Yeah.
That you have to have key support people that you can reach out to, or like that you have an idea that, you hold it really close and you really want it to go well, but you need to know, is it a good idea? So you have to have people to trust, or to say, well, I need you to be honest and tell me the truth about this. And that they'll say, it's a good idea, but nobody's going to buy it. So there's all of those things.
Yeah.
And actually, whether it's entrepreneur or just your life, I think we need those things in every aspect of our life anyway.
No, I completely agree. And it's interesting, on one side, I've done research with CEOs, and one of the key things that comes out of that in terms of for their performance and well-being is being part of peer networks. So I think you're right. Like, whether you're an entrepreneur, whether you're working within an organization, you need that. And actually interesting, one of the large organizations we work with, they showed me some of the research that they've done globally. And not surprisingly, the two biggest things essentially that impact people's well-being. So from a positive perspective, is the people they work with. From a negative perspective, it's the people they work with.
Yep.
So you can see how, if you're able to then, from a workplace experience perspective, help and nurture those social environments, it has such a big impact. I think I'm going to probably listen back to that last 10 minutes 2 or 3 times. So thank you for that, Barbara. Just coming towards the end of our chat today, I want you to tell me a little bit about Mentis One, because this is now essentially something which, from what I've heard, it's going to really potentially revolutionize the space of mental health within the workplace. So could you tell us a little bit about what you're doing in that area and what it is?
Well, the word revolutionise, I really hope it does. And personally, I agree with you, but of course I have to say it's fantastic. So basically, this idea came from that last decade, looking at organisations coming with the same problems, no matter what size they were, no matter what sector they were in, because again, that's the people are the good thing and the people are the bad thing, is the problem in the same, in all companies, that if you have human beings working for you, you are going to have these issues around mental health regardless. And so it also means that when the problems come up, the answers are the same. It's just scalable depending on the size of the organisation. So what I started looking at very much was this piece around organisations initially having this piece about volunteers and coming forward and telling their story, which is phenomenal to do, but there's so much around safeguarding that worries me about it, that if the organisation hasn't planned loads of things around that, or they haven't got a structure in place, or if there are still people who don't believe that mental health is a real thing, or they think that somebody might be faking it because of productivity. That is not the right thing to do in the organisation. So that was kind of one of the places where it started. And then when I started really understanding how many organisations were starting to take on programs like mental health first aid or whatever the generic derivative has become through Spectrum or the different organisations, and they don't have a follow-on, they don't understand what's behind it. The people who are buying the product and buying the training are not doing it, so they don't understand what it is they're actually asking these people to do. They don't understand the impact of it. It's a matter of, well, we know we need to do something and that's a good fit, so let's do that, and then that's it done. So I started looking at, well, what is it that if this could work better, what would that look like? How could people use it and what impact would it have? And in the end, how would people feel if it worked really well? So looking at that, I started understanding it was a matter of actually the kind of people that interact with mental health programs. You've got the people on the ground, so the people who have the lived experience, the people who have somebody in their life that they care about. They're usually the ones that want to do the program and become the first aider. You then have the manager of those people. So it's a matter of, well, you're on my team and you happen to be a mental health first aider. So how does that work? So we mentioned about workload before, but from a support perspective, maybe I need to be a little bit more sensitive around things that might be impacting you because you're doing this in your workplace as well. So there's a piece there. And again, a lot of those managers haven't done that training, so they may not understand exactly what it is. And then you have the wider group. So you've got your senior leadership team, you've got your wellbeing lead, you've got your HR. And they're the group who will make sure that it's bought in. They're the ones who will make sure that it's written into policy if that belongs there or whatever the processes are. However, most often it isn't written into policy. Most often there isn't a follow-up. It's a matter of, well, we did a 2-day training and we saw that such and such an organisation did lanyards, so we've done lanyards. Or we've seen X, Y, and Z done, so we've taken those steps. And that's as far as it goes. So what I started looking at was from a practical perspective, if I am a first aider or a champion or an advocate, whatever, what do I need to be reminded of so that I do the correct boundary setting when I have a conversation with you as a colleague? What support do I need afterwards? What do I need to let my organisation know? So, for example, the monitoring and evaluation should know how many hours I've given per year. Not about the conversations we've had or what your name is, but it might be that I've had 10 people come to me in the last period, and out of that there's been 20 hours. So that's now part of my performance review. So if I'm looking at my workload and my workload has gone down, it's now obvious because I've done 20 hours. But maybe if we then attach the EAP, we can see that actually the rate has gone up in the usage of that, tying it back to because we've been pushing it forward, so appropriate support has been given. So there's a couple of pieces there that need to be tied together. So what I've done in the last 18 months is basically downloaded my brain from all the things I've been dreaming about for the last 10 years for this program, because I was looking at, if I am the champion and I can go on to this app or this website or have a book or have something that will remind me before I have a conversation what it is I need to know, that after I've had the conversation, I know exactly what I'm supposed to do. From a reporting perspective, I have a form I fill in or I tick a few boxes and then that gets fed up the chain. From a point of view of other things I might need to know, so training around safeguarding, around supervision, around cultural difference, all of that stuff, that it's all included in there, and that I understand if I'm struggling what I need to do. And then the same goes for the manager. So whether I've done the 2-day training or not, I know what's involved. I know what supports are there. I know what forms need to be filled in. I know what reasonable accommodation means, and I know how to access it for this person. Or if they come to me and say, well, somebody's come to me and they're looking for something from a reasonable accommodation perspective, but I don't understand enough about it. As my manager, what can you tell me? So it's that side of it. And then also as a manager, how do I mind my own mental health while I'm supporting this additional role in my team? And then there's the HR senior leader version that's looking at, from an organisation-wide perspective, are we doing this? Is it being embedded properly? Where's your mental health policy? What does that look like? What framework goes with that? What forms need to be filled in? From an employment law perspective, where do we sit here? What needs to be done? And how are we monitoring this? Because also then there's the business case and return on investment. We've spent this money, we've put this time in, we're now allocating additional resources for the person because we're taking them out of their job to do this. Does it actually work? Are people actually using it? And if they are, is there a benefit? So it's all of that is now wrapped into this. And in addition to that, just because I think it's deadly doesn't mean it is. So I have got a grant from the Leo for €15,000, and I am going ahead with national and international research. So I have teamed up with an organisation that specialise in research, and they're very interested in appropriate trauma response as well. So really, really good fit for this. So I am at the beta testing phase with my platform at the moment. And at the end of the year, then I will be including this research into it. And we will have, organisations will have tested it by the end of the year. So it's very exciting. And I really hope that it's going to be helpful for people to have appropriate conversations, and that it's that piece of you're not shouting in the dark, you're not alone, and that there is a mechanism there. It's a safety net. No matter where you are on the journey or where you are in the organisation, that there is something here to help you to do this better.
Well done. It's incredible as well. You've taken your lived experience in that space. You've looked at potentially what are the steps or the potential gaps for the follow-on after somebody's done, say, a mental health first aid training program. How do we encourage more people then to feel comfortable using EAP? Because notoriously EAP would have very low usage rates, and how do we increase those and make sure companies, as you say, get the actual value for having them for employees within organizations? So it sounds like you've given this a hell of a lot of thought. You're now going to do extensive research in the space. So it sounds like you are ticking all the appropriate boxes to give this the best chance in terms of landing with the audience. So no, well done. It's incredibly impressive.
Thank you. I'm very excited. And the thing is, I do have a long-term dream that stuff like this will become available, either free of charge, or there's something that is a give back from a point of view of thinking about those organisations that can't afford a lot of these things, or they don't have the minimum amount of people to sit on a training programme, or whatever their barriers are. So from a campaigner perspective, and it was one thing winning that award last year, I realised I'm an accidental activist. I never knew what that was before, but it has very definitely become the thing of when I say somebody should do something, the automatic next response is, you're somebody, you do it. And so that's very much the piece for me about helping people to bridge the gap and to reduce the barriers, because again, we all have mental health. So it means that any of us can become unwell or can become better. And it's about helping people understand the steps, and particularly when we're thinking about the workplace, because there is that fear around the legal element of it. I've had people on mental health first aid courses and different workshops say to me, well, if I'm listening to somebody and I give advice like, am I legally liable? It's those kind of questions that we need to answer. We need to be saying, well, actually, if you've been asked to do this, then it should be covered under your company's insurance. But has the company thought about that? Yeah. Has it been updated? So it's those kind of things that we need to be creating. Again, going back to very early in our conversation, the culture of safety to talk about these things.
No, I couldn't agree more. Maybe just a signpost for listeners to take a look at the national poster campaign, obviously, from Mental Health Matters. Is the deadline is towards the back end of this month, June. So if we miss the deadline, people can also keep an eye out for the event itself, which is happening in September.
So September 25th. So last year we launched with the Lord Mayor in Smock Alley, and this year we are going to be launching in Wood Quay on the 25th of September. So this is going to be open to anybody to attend. The posters will be made available, and On Post are creating postcards again this year. So we're creating resources for people to use in time for World Mental Health Day. And again, this is everybody's conversation. So if you're a workplace, if you're an individual, if you're in a university, a school, a community, whatever it is, this is a campaign for you to be involved in.
Barbara Brennan, as always, thank you very much for sitting with us today. It's, as always, been memorable. Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Thank you for joining me on the Lead Well podcast. As always, if you've enjoyed this episode, don't forget to hit that subscribe button.